The sudden silence was what hit me first, not the words of the announcement, but the deafening void that followed. The CEO's voice, amplified through the public address system, had just declared my immediate departure with an almost clinical detachment, then simply stopped. It wasn't a hush, it was the sound of air being sucked from a room, leaving an echo of a roar that never happened. I stood there, utterly exposed in that corporate arena, the bright fluorescent lights suddenly feeling like spotlights, every gaze a potential judgment. My first instinct was a sharp, disorienting confusion, a blank slate where my future had been, but that haze quickly dissolved, replaced by a cold, unwavering clarity. This wasn't some unfortunate oversight or budget cut. This was deliberate, a calculated move by people who, in their haste to bury me, had fatally underestimated the very ground they stood on. They thought they'd removed my key. They were wrong. The world didn't shatter the way they expected. Instead, after the initial blow landed, a profound stillness settled over me. It was not the paralysis of shock, but a calm that felt like a quiet hum beneath my skin, an unexpected anchor in the sudden tempest. They anticipated a breakdown, a panicked scramble, perhaps a desperate outburst echoing their own chaotic moves. But their noise faded into an irrelevant hum, allowing me to perceive the new boundaries of the metaphorical arena they had just forced me into. I saw the layout, the trapdoors, the uneven playing field, all with unnerving clarity. This wasn't about surviving their immediate attack. It was about meticulously mapping the terrain, understanding the true nature of their game. My silence, which they likely interpreted as defeat, became my first weapon. I wasn't just observing, I was recalibrating. They wanted to fight on their terms, but I was already drafting the blueprints to dismantle their entire structure, brick by careful brick from within. This clarity was my foundation, and the rebuilding would begin the moment I chose to move, read as compliance. For years, I'd worn the invisible chains of expectation and assumption, accepting the restricted paths laid out for me in my early career. Projects rerouted, ideas subtly absorbed by others, my voice consistently tuned down to a whisper in louder rooms. Each instance chipped away at my outward composure, yet quietly hardened my resolve. The architects of this confinement weren't malicious. They were custodians of an established order, comfortable in an ecosystem where certain roles were fixed. My deference was simply evidence I knew my place. It was business as usual for them, a reinforcing of a hierarchy that benefited them greatly. This latest transgression, the brazen disregard for my contributions and future, wasn't just another link in the chain. It was the entire anchor being dropped. It was a direct assault on the dignity I had worked quietly to preserve. The difference now was profound. I would no longer merely react to the tug on the leash. The quiet girl who thought compliance earned respect had vanished, replaced by a woman recognizing the weight of those chains and, crucially, her capacity to break them. This wasn't about revenge, it was about reclamation. My silence, cultivated for so long, would now serve a different, sharper purpose. While they were busy polishing their narratives and celebrating what they assumed was an uncontested victory, I was already at work, not in a flurry of emotion, but with the quiet resolve of an artisan. My days became a meticulous strategy montage, each hour dedicated to building a defense so airtight it would also serve as my offense. The stack of artifacts grew steadily, time-stamped emails revealing their internal discussions, screenshots of fraudulent financial statements, profit and loss documents digitally altered, but their server logs betrayed the edits and the notarized legal retainer agreement with Miller and Associates, a silent promise of expertise. The process was painstaking, a slow burn of due diligence that defied their rapid, chaotic moves. Public record access for their other shadowy ventures often required weeks of waiting. Each form filed, each confirmation email received, another brick added to my impenetrable wall. I quietly secured the property deed for the lakeside cabin, a joint asset they presumed was untouchable, moving it under a newly formed LLC in my maiden name after a complex 4-week escrow period. My legal team and I spent countless hours dissecting every clause of the partnership agreement I'd once signed so naively, identifying every loophole, every overlooked covenant. Their public spectacle was loud and brash. My work was the precise, silent hum of a well-oiled machine, constructing competence in the dark. Have you ever felt backed into a corner, forced to strategize your way out? My shield was now forged, heavy with fat, but the battle had yet to begin. While they were still reveling in what they believed was a decisive, discreet victory, confident their machinations remained hidden from public scrutiny, I was already moving. The quiet hum of my office was punctuated only by the click of my mouse as I finalized the upload. Within hours, a formal notice of intent to enforce preemptive rights concerning the very parcel of land they'd quietly secured for their pet project became public record. This wasn't a confrontational letter, but a surgical legal filing a digital landmine laid months ago, quietly waiting for their next move. Their smug overconfidence, evident in every dismissive glance and hushed conversation, would soon give way to a dawning, unsettling realization. They had meticulously orchestrated their moves behind closed doors, but they hadn't anticipated that the arena itself had shifted beneath their feet. That single, innocuous filing, linked to an overlooked clause in the original acquisition agreement, a detail they had arrogantly brushed aside as insignificant, fundamentally changed the game. The control they believed they wielded so absolutely had just been subtly, but unequivocally, transferred to me. Their silence was brief, a mere gasp before the roar. The moment my carefully orchestrated notification was delivered, their carefully constructed calm fractured. Hostile emails began flooding my inbox, subject lines screaming accusations of betrayal and breach like "immediate retraction required" or "your treachery will not stand." These weren't reasoned arguments. They were vitriolic rants carbon copied to mutual acquaintances, clearly intended to isolate and intimidate. But I met their escalating noise with unwavering, strategic silence. Each frantic keystroke, each angry word became carefully documented evidence. Then came the public smears. Subtle at first coded posts on local community pages, carefully spread rumors masquerading as concern among shared social circles. Next, the legal threats arrived. An initial cease and desist letter from their attorney, followed by escalating demands and thinly veiled defamation suits. I simply forwarded each formal-looking PDF to my own counsel, noting timestamps in their increasingly frantic tone. I watched their legal bills accumulate in my mind. Every professional interaction was a billable hour for them. The irony wasn't lost on me. Their attempts to reclaim control were only costing them more, both financially and in terms of public image. The local whispers, initially sympathetic to their plight, began to shift. They didn't understand the extent of my leverage, the true depth of what I held, and that not knowing fueled their increasingly desperate flailing. They continued to thrash, but the water was only getting deeper for them, while I remained anchored, observing the currents. The hum of the conference room's air conditioning was a stark counterpoint to the growing tension as they finally arrived 15 minutes late as always. My gaze met theirs, a steady, unyielding presence, a silent promise that the open loop from Section 1, set in motion so long ago, was about to be closed with finality. I didn't shout, I spoke with a quiet precision that cut through the silence. My hand moved deliberately, placing the file before them. It wasn't a thick, dramatic stack, but a lean, devastating compilation of irrefutable facts. Each document was a precise, damning indictment. The forensic audit report detailing every diverted dollar, the timestamps on unauthorized transfers, the notarized affidavits from the vendors they'd defrauded, the total sum of their illicit gains, meticulously calculated and displayed on the screen behind me, appeared as a cold, hard number. It was a figure so stark, so undeniable, it instantly choked off their bluster. Their initial masks of feigned indignation crumpled, revealing disbelief, then something akin to cold fear in their eyes. They tried to interrupt, to deny, to deflect, but the sheer weight and clarity of the evidence formed an impenetrable wall against their desperate words. My attorney, Mr. Davies, sitting quietly beside me, merely allowed their impotent protests to dissipate before sliding the pre-drafted cessation and non-disparagement agreements across the polished surface. These weren't requests, they were the new terms, non-negotiable, outlining the immediate forfeiture of their illicitly gained shares and the irrevocable severance of all ties. They had anticipated a collapse, a melodramatic breakdown, a plea for reconciliation. Instead, they faced a composed architect of their own reckoning who spoke only of concrete resolutions and legally binding finality. This wasn't about vengeance for me, but about establishing an unassailable foundation for my future, one built on clarity, integrity, and freedom from their toxic shadow. Now, I ask you, what personal arenas are you ready to conquer? They had built an arena for my defeat. Instead, I built a legacy. The signatures, one by one, transformed a protracted battle into a closed chapter, leaving behind only the quiet satisfaction of a destiny meticulously reclaimed and a future redefined. The pen strokes were heavy with resignation, each one a surrender to the inevitable truth they had tried so desperately to avoid. As the last signature dried on the page, the room seemed to exhale, releasing months of accumulated tension into the sterile air. I gathered the documents with deliberate care, each movement measured and final, a choreographed conclusion to their chaotic symphony. The silence that followed wasn't the oppressive void from that first announcement. It was the clean, crisp quiet of resolution. They left without fanfare, their earlier bravado reduced to shuffling feet and averted gazes. I remained seated for a moment longer, allowing myself the luxury of complete stillness, the weight of victory settling into my bones. This was the closing of a circle they had drawn around me, now transformed into the foundation of something entirely